Hello, everybody. I am John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives and a happy Martin Luther King's Day. It's Monday, January 19th, 2026, and we're here to talk about the Rockefeller brothers' plan of the Prospect for America, by, published by the Special Studies Unit back in 1955-56. I contend we're still living in the shadow of the Rockefeller brothers' plan, and I want you to follow along with me. I'm going to post this article from redefininggod.com, where I hope to flesh out the case that we're still living in Henry Kissinger's world. Beg your pardon? Here we go. So today I'm going to be sharing with you, I'll be reading from a website called Redefining God, an article I noticed at least 3 years ago. I think the article may have been published in 2017 or so. I can't tell for sure. But, and the anonymous author is not telling us really much about his background. On the other hand, the depth in which he has analyzed the Rockefeller brothers' funds, production, the Special Studies Unit, and its publication Prospect for America is quite impressive. And so I want to share it with you today as we think about where the world is going now, and are we still in the projection that was formed by the Rockefeller plans back in the 1950s? And a bigger question, which we will try to talk to about with Harley Schlanger when I talk to him tomorrow, is, are the BRICS just another Rockefeller big bank project that we're getting fooled by into accepting a new world order that we thought we were getting rid of? Let's dig into the text together. Here we go. See if I can make it a little bigger for you. All right, here we go. The Rockefeller plan for the BRICS New World Order, in their own words. Decades before President George H.W. Bush introduced the New World Order into the American vernacular, the Rockefeller family and their minions were making plans to expend America's post-World War II power to bring about such an order. In the course of researching Lawrence Rockefeller for my last entry, titled Where Are the Rockefellers and Why Are the Rockefellers and the Jesuits Guiding the UFO Disclosure Movement, I came across a book titled Prospect for America, the Rockefeller Panel Reports. And I've read from this book before, by the way, on the show. I think it was in Mindfields, but I really think it's worthwhile revisiting and going through the whole thing together. It was the product of a 1956 Rockefeller Brothers Fund effort known as the Special Studies Project, and it lays out the blueprint for the multilateral/multipolar New World Order that is currently materializing around us. In the aftermath of World War II and the resulting formation of the United Nations, which the Rockefellers were instrumental in creating and funding, the Special Studies Project, directed by, drumroll, Henry Kissinger, was formed to carry out two apparent tasks. One, to create an action plan to bring about the elite's long-sought world government within the existing post-war environment, and two, to spin the agenda in such a way that it could be sold to the American people as being in their best interest. Upon completion of their work, the Special Studies Project's various panels compiled their reports into an incomplete, sanitized, and heavily spun book, the above-mentioned Prospect for America. The book spells out how to sacrifice the national interests of the United States. Or, when it speaks of the opportunity before America of helping to shape a new world order. To begin our journey through the Rockefeller plan for the New World Order, let's start with their definition of the Old World Order. The 13 empires of the Old World Order. And this is quotes and pick copies directly from that book, Prospect for America. A sound United States foreign economic policy must be based on an accurate assessment of the world in which it must operate. Disintegration of the 19th century political system, the central political fact of our time, is the disintegration of the international system that dominated world affairs almost until the outbreak of World War II. Until the turn of the century, 13 empires ruled the world. The neutrality of the Western Hemisphere, as of many regions today, depended on the existence of an equilibrium maintained by other states. Isn't that interesting? I'm going to make a comment here that the neutrality of the Western Hemisphere is, well, that's what we're looking at right now, isn't it? And he's saying that it depended upon a balance of power that existed at the time. This balance of power saw to it that most transformations were relatively minor. They did not threaten or seem to threaten the survival of the states composing the international system. All right, the 19th century system provided order, rationalized administration, and arrangements for economic exchange. It supplied a form of answer to the interdependence of societies. Europe was the world's principal manufacturer and the principal user of raw materials. Okay, that's a very important point that's been made over and over again here at McDuff Lives, and it's so important that we understand that the tradition of the 19th century was that Europe was a manufacturer, and they took all the raw materials they wanted from their colonies. She was the world's primary banker and source of capital. People, goods, and money moved with relative freedom from country to country, and money moved with relative freedom from country to country. And Europe's banks financed the exchange of goods. The gold standard maintained by a central banking policy of the principal powers made for a kind of common currency. The internal stresses of the imperial system began to be apparent in the 19th century and became conspicuous in 1914. World War I led to the collapse of the German, Austrian, Turkish, and Russian empires. By 1955, most of the remaining imperialist systems had dissolved, so say the Rockefellers. The 19th century system of empires as a means of maintaining world order, arranging world economics, and settling international disputes has collapsed. So, after having consolidated power over most of the world through empire building, the occulted powers, and he uses the term occulted powers, that means the hidden powers that we can't see, that are moving things around that we are baffled at what happens, the people that pull the strings, in other words, the hidden powers or occulted powers, he says. The occulted powers faced a problem. Empires, by their very nature, are territorial, competitive, and nationalistic, and are not amenable to submitting to outside control as would be required for world governance. That's the whole theory of MAGA, right? Make America great again, America first, not amenable to world governance. Clearly, these old structures would need to be demolished and replaced by newer, more malleable structures in order to finish the global consolidation. For this reason, the OP's, occulted powers, fomented and financed the two world wars to break down the old empires and create international chaos from which a new order could be birthed. At the end of each world war, the OPs, the occulted powers, immediately planted the seed of global governance, but the seeds didn't germinate as expected. Now, quoting back from the prospect, Twice within a generation, the United States has been instrumental in bringing a world organization into being. The League of Nations in 1919, though we refused to join, thank goodness, and the United Nations in 1945. In both instances, the impetus was the belief that the interdependence of nations, demonstrated in two catastrophic wars, had to find an institutional expression. Oh, yeah, it did, huh? In each case, high hopes were not fully realized because the formal institutions of the world organizations were designed to achieve more than the consensus of existing shared aspirations was prepared to support. In other words, we said no. Okay, despinning the last underlined statement, they are basically saying that the nations were insufficiently motivated to hand over sovereignty to the globalist institutions. So, to overcome this lack of shared aspirations, quote unquote, the OPs fostered the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. Yeah, it makes sense to me. I don't think that the Cold War was any type of a organic thing. I think it was constructed. That's my opinion, as well as this man's opinion or woman. By threatening some nations with Soviet aggression and others with American aggression, they compelled the nations to band together and join sides for protection. The members of each side were then pressured to increase economic and defensive cooperation to fend off the menace of the other side. Those who were programmed to believe they lived in the people's communist world cooperated to block aggression from the imperialist world, and those who were programmed to believe they lived in the free world cooperated to block aggression from the, quote, Soviet sphere, unquote. And back to the prospect. Conclusion. While the Soviet threat in the field of foreign economic policy is potentially formidable, it must be seen in its proper perspective. It is menacing to the degree that the cohesion of the free world is inadequate. Again, this person who wrote this is really got a great handle on things, because look what's going on right now. You know, the countries of the West are no longer united against Russia. Read Soviet Union. If these countries are part of larger groupings, they will be able to resist pressure more easily and negotiate on a more nearly equal basis. The Soviet effort is impressive primarily because the free world has failed to develop a workable structure within which the industrialized and newly developing regions can cooperate in fulfilling the aspirations of their peoples. We must contribute to the growth and cohesiveness of the community of free nations, not merely because we wish to prevent an expansion of the Soviet sphere, but because we want to cooperate in bringing about a new international system dedicated to peace, to human dignity, and to respect for national independence. In the United States, people were programmed to believe that fending off the Red Menace was a matter of life and death. That's certainly true in the American military, and the more I read about the thoughts of people at the time, it's it's a great psyop that was played upon us to make us believe that we had to expend everything to stop communism around the world. Where did that come from? Let's read some more. Our participation in world economic and social progress is important from the point of view of our own economy and that of the free world. It is crucial from the point of view of our survival and the survival of freedom everywhere. Okay, so what they're saying is we're going to have to give up sovereignty in order to survive as a nation. Yeah, that kind of craziness. But the Cold War, just like the current crop of engineered conflicts raging about us, ISIS, Ukraine, and the China Seas, again, he's writing 6 or 7 years ago, was all about forcing nations into groups and groups into a world order. understood, okay? The Cold War was about forcing everybody into groups. Once it had served its purpose, the Cold War was ended in order to allow the two sides to be merged under the New World Order. Here's a quote from the New York Times, 1990. President Mikhail S. Gorbachev of the Soviet Union ended an exhausting transcontinental visit to the United States today with an appeal for a radically changed system of global alliances. Rather than strengthening defense, he asserted, alliances of the future should be designed to foster an international unity that would, quote, protect the environment, combat hunger, diseases, drug addiction, and ignorance, unquote. Pardon me a second. The Soviet leader said his second summit conference with Mr. Bush had helped move the United States and the Soviet Union toward a new world, quote unquote. For a new type of progress throughout the world to become a reality, everyone must change, Mr. Gorbachev added. Tolerance is the alpha and omega of a new world order, unquote. As one would expect, Prospect for America offers a glimpse of what Gorbachev and Bush's New World Order will look like. On page 26, we're told what the OPs and their globalist minions are hoping for. The hoped-for result is peace in a world divided into smaller units, but organized and acting in common effort to permit and assist progress in economic, political, cultural, and spiritual life. Such a community must facilitate the freest and fullest access by everyone to the thinking of everyone. It must allow for the widest diversity of ideas, social structure, and forms of expression compatible with the functioning of the community. Got to be compatible, okay? It would presumably consist of regional institutions under an international body of growing authority, combined so as to be able to deal with those problems that increasingly the separate nations will not be able to solve alone. Do you think there might be a pandemic or something that might not respect national boundaries and we might have to act together to deal with it? Oh my God. Take note of how the passage says, combined so as to be able to deal with those problems that increasingly the separate nations will not be able to solve alone. Here, they are telling us that they'll be purposefully creating increasingly difficult problems to compel the nations to accept the New World Order. We've certainly been witnessing that, haven't we? Oh my goodness, he wrote that 6 years ago, and look at all the stuff that's happened since then and what's going on right now. Absolutely. If there's a hidden hand behind it, it's really shaking the tree right now. As for the New World Order structure itself, we're told that it will, quote, consist of regional institutions under an international body of growing. And then he adds to the parentheses, in parentheses, to the point of total control, authority. Elsewhere in the book, we're told that the NWO will also include functional structures for matters that require management beyond the regional boundaries. So let's dive deeper into how such a structure would look and operate. Number one, at the top is the international body of growing authority. Needless to say, this is the United Nations. In addition to participating directly in the development of two regional groups, the United States has participated fully and from the start in the United Nations, the international organization that today holds out the reasonable hope of being able to take over more and more functions and to assume increasingly large responsibilities. In supporting the spirit and letter of the Charter, the United States has shown that it gives more than lip service to the indispensable world order that, as we have seen, is basic to the American consensus. As we have seen, is basic to the American consensus. In other words, they floated the idea a paragraph ago, and now they've decided that it's a done deal, and we should be convinced of it. Okay. Is this Henry Kissinger writing this, by the way? I wonder if he actually is the architect of the text. The UN is proof of our conviction that problems which are of a worldwide impact must be dealt with through institutions global in their scope. It's the 1955 guys, and they're already projecting the World Economic Forum, all of the UN organizations, the World Health Organization, all of these things are the fruit of this very uh, book and the studies that went into it, in my opinion. Regional arrangements, policies to promote the vitality of our economy, are only the beginning of our task. They must be taken concurrently with measures which make the interdependence of nations a source of mutual strength. It's impossible for the United States to deal creatively with 80 sovereign nations solely on a bilateral basis. The most natural multinational arrangements are frequently regional. In many parts of the world, geography combines with common history to provide the basis for common objectives and fruitful cooperative efforts. Okay, and now we have the United Nations Millennium Development Goals report of 2009, in which they have painted the world into 10 regional groupings. It's interesting to see old Greenland up there with the United States. But of course, this is almost exactly from Orwell's 1948 publication of 1984, where instead of 10, it's three groups, which is even more grouped and concentrated. But the Western Europe, Greenland, the United States are all together in that one, along with, of course, Australia, which shouldn't be left out, and New Zealand, in the Western group called Oceania in that book. Well, anyway, it looks as though that's what Trump is about, is consolidating a Western Hemisphere group pursuant to the Prospect for America of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. It is not possible to describe the precise form regional arrangements shall take in all parts of the globe. They may involve joint efforts to achieve economic development, common markets, and free trade areas, or functional arrangements like the European Coal and Steel Community. Again, that's what becomes the EC. Fully developed, they imply a joint accord on monetary and exchange arrangements, a common discipline on fiscal matters, and a free movement of capital and labor. Yes, that's right, free trade. We believe that this regional approach has worldwide validity because the particular adaptation will be different for each region. The structure will have to be worked out. We feel the United States should encourage the development of such regional structures. We have tried to develop the outline for Western Hemisphere unity in Section 5. Free trade agreements, joint economic development institutions, exchange agreements, this all sounds very familiar, doesn't it? So when an East versus West propagandist tries to sell you the idea that the BRICS Development Bank or a Chinese-Russian currency swap deal demonstrates nations are trying to free themselves from the New World Order, just remember this passage. Russia and China are following the NWO script to the letter, but I'll get back to this point a little later in the article. 3, below the UN will also be functional arrangements. Some problems and opportunities cut across regional lines. Others should be dealt with on a worldwide basis. 3 of the most important functional challenges, the problem of primary commodity products, the new vistas of science, and the role of international financial institutions will be discussed here. That is in the Rockefeller book. One example of a functional arrangement is the BRICS alliance. It cuts across regional lines and gives form to the dialectic clash between Anglo-American bankers and BRICS bankers, which will birth the New World Order. There you go. This is the author's theme, is that it's going to be the BRICS and not Chase Manhattan Bank that's going to be imposing the new world order. And of course, we're going to love it, right? We'll own nothing and be happy, maybe. Another example is the International Monetary Fund, which will manage the new global reserve currency after the engineered East versus West drama has climaxed. With the planned structure of the New World Order laid before us, let's have a look at how the Rockefellers planned to get America to join in. Prospect for America goes to great lengths to make the counterintuitive case that building a global government is in America's best interest. You know, I've never really thought that it wasn't in America's best interest, based upon my education, my socialization, my understanding of, the UN as a benevolent body that's going to stop war and stop terrible things that countries might do if they weren't restrained. But it sure also looks like a rabbit trap, a trap to get us to come in, and then we can't leave. And that's been the fight in American politics in my whole lifetime is, do we maintain our sovereignty or do we cave in to the New World Order? Here's a provocative statement. The nation state as it was conceived in the 16th century is now transforming itself. It has become necessary to talk in terms of nations as if they were still the solid entities that traditional theory describes. In fact, they haven't been that for a long time. The growth of the modern world has seen the interdependency of nations and communities increase to a point where independence, at least in the sense of self sufficiency, is seriously eroded. If the United States were to be confronted with the necessity of existing apart from the trade of the world, apart from its intellectual and spiritual currents and the support of allied and kindred nations, it would quickly realize that independence can be pushed too far. Aha, that's what you say. Okay, Rockefeller brothers or Henry Kissinger, you're saying that those of us that are insisting on sovereignty are simply just too back in the 16th century, and we just can't do it anymore. That's the opposite of the American spirit, isn't it? We're the can-do country. We're the country that provides liberty and justice for all. We're the good guys. And to say that we can't exist as a sovereign nation, or if we needed to, we couldn't survive without other countries, with all the land and resources and assets we have, I don't think that's a reasonable thing, but they were trying to sell that, weren't they? The challenge then is to build a new structure that will make possible the fulfillment of the basic purposes of humanity. The well-being and the prosperity of every nation will depend to an increasing degree on its participation in a complex of nations designed to satisfy awakening human aspirations. No country, not even the United States, can meet the expectations of its people or continue to grow merely by developing and using its own resources alone. Again, I'm not so sure about that. I wouldn't mind trying it, would you? Such in broadest outline, let's see, Kissinger and company also make the assertion that building the NWO is the grand objective of America's foreign policy. Such in broadest outline is the image of the world whose building the United States sees as the grand objective of its foreign policy. I never knew that. Nobody told me that the grand objective of American foreign policy is to create the New World Order. No, but that's the Rockefellers' plan, isn't it? And that effectiveness of U.S. policy will be judged by how well America fosters the globalist institutions. The growth of community. The image of an ideal world sketched in the foregoing pages is not drawn out of thin air. It's already begun. The British Commonwealth of Nations forms one. The French community forms one of the most recent. In two areas in particular, we see regional associations vitally related to American policy. These are the Western Hemisphere and the Atlantic community. Okay, the Western Hemisphere, that's what Trump's talking about. The Atlantic community, that's what the Europeans and Wall Street and Mark Carney's and the big banks are talking about. And it's always been that way ever since before the revolution. People and educated people, worldly people understood that the Western Hemisphere is going to have to be treated as one big region. And the tension between people that wanted to go west and west and west, go west, young man, versus the people that want to maintain and enhance and get rich from our ties to old Europe, the Atlantic community. That's a struggle that's been going on in this country for 249 years and 6 months. Okay, skip a little bit ahead. The deindustrialization of America. 1955, we had the biggest industries in the world. We were steel, we were cars, we were electricity, we were everything. 1955, and then here we are writing about the opposite. A great deal depends on, therefore, on developing an international structure which reflects the interdependence of countries, large and small, industrialized and less developed. Europe and Japan, together with the United States, supply most of the machinery and equipment and capital investment required by the less developed countries for their industrialization. The less developed countries, in turn, supply an increasing percentage of the raw materials and commodities required by the industrialized nations. Excuse me. I like to see they use the word required. The materials and commodities required by the industrialized nations. We must have them. It is necessary to establish a structure that gives effect to this partnership, a partnership between the people with the raw materials and the people with the machines. The same old story. Extend the empire through colonization. An essential component will be an increasingly liberal United States trade policy, which will permit other nations to sell in American markets. Okay, hello, transistor radios from Japan. Remember them laying down on the concrete next to the pool with a Japanese transistor radio? Permit other nations to sell in American markets. Well, everything that we have now is coming from other nations, especially China, right? As the globalists make the case for unilaterally removing the trade barriers that protected America's economy from competition with foreign slave labor. Yeah, foreign slave labor. That's what it was about. It wasn't like we were too stupid to make a profit. We were protecting ourselves from getting swallowed up by foreign goods made by people virtually enslaved. That's what it was about. Free trade is the opposite of that. Kissinger and company also make the case that we shouldn't economically defend ourselves, since it might create, quote, impediments to the progress of others, unquote. Whoa. The recent tendency for American exports to decline in relation to imports and the significant symptom of the drain on United States gold indicate how the world economic system is changing. The United States will need to make adjustments to such a developing situation. The important thing is that these adjustments be made in a way that does not thwart economic growth elsewhere in the world. Okay. Remember, it was Ro, Ro, Gaither, Harold Rowan Gaither, who said that what we need to do is reduce the American income to match that of Russia. And that was policy. And American people never knew that that was policy. But here it is coming from the Rockefeller book in 1955. The important thing is that we do not thwart economic growth elsewhere in the world. In other words, let them have their slave labor factories and we will buy their tennis shoes. The degree of our support of defense establishments in other countries can well be re-examined now that many of these countries have achieved a substantial economic revival. But the main answer to such a symptom as the drain on gold is not in policies of withdrawal or protectionism. It is the maintaining efficient standards of production and enlarging our rate of growth. The long-range interest of the United States is in economic growth throughout the world. It wants the continuing prosperity of its allies in the advanced Western countries. More than that, it wants the other areas of the world to develop both agriculturally and industrially to their fullest potentiality. Measures taken by the United States in response to domestic economic situations must be looked at carefully in the light of such impediments as they may create to the progress of others. Okay, you unions, don't go on strike for more wages because that would impede the progress of others. And to give Americans a taste of what's coming, the United States, in short, is challenged so to conduct itself as to bridge over in every possible way the potential cleavage between East and West. That's what Gaither was saying, right? We can hope for bonds of friendship and ties of interest with the East. We must not let emotion or differences of ideology close the door to such possibilities of better relations with the Chinese people as may arise in years to come. Standing for freedom and for the essential dignity of man, the United States cannot see itself cut off from any continent or country. Written in 1955 at one of the most vicious, heated times of the Cold War, where resentment against Mao and China, and we had the China lobby, this idea that America is now going to enjoy better relations with the Chinese people, fostered by, the Rockefellers, that, it's mind-boggling that they would say that at a time in the middle of the Cold War. That's all. Standing for freedom and for the essential dignity of man, the United States cannot see itself cut off from any continent or country. As it turns out, and this is the author of our webpage here, as it turns out, America did indeed lay itself down as a bridge to pull China into the New World Order. We did it by luring them in, and with a great deal of our national wealth, through lopsided trade and outsourcing. And this brings us to the subject of the BRICS. The BRICS' role in erecting the New World Order. Prospect goes on to address the status of those nations that were, quote, freed, unquote, by the engineered collapse of the old world order. 20 new sovereign nations have come into being since the end of World War II. More will undoubtedly emerge in the next decade. While fulfilling their aspirations to national sovereignty, these nations face new problems. At a moment when the pressures of the contemporary period impel greater and greater interdependence, the newly independent nations are driven or tempted to erect self-sufficient economies, which tend to restrict the broad markets essential for industrialization. You dumb African countries are trying to be self-sufficient. You can't do it, don't you know? You need to have us. We're going to come in and we're going to show you how to do it. I mean, it's so obvious when you read this. One system of organizing the international order has been destroyed without replacement by another. The diverging forces of nationalism must be balanced by converging forces, seeking to bring about a free association of nations, so that political, social, and economic cooperation can transcend national boundaries. Simon Bolivar, the great Latin American liberator, expressed this principle of interdependence of free nations more than a century ago. He saw that as the young republics of the Western Hemisphere achieved their independence, some new system of free association would be needed. Quote, if we, no, I'm sorry, but now that was I'm closing the quote of the Prospect book and back to our author at redefininggod.com. If we remove the spin from this passage, it tells us that the new nation states' drive to achieve true independence must be balanced, quote, by converging forces. And what form did these converging forces take? The globalists employed hot and cold wars and insurgencies, trade conflicts, and economic hitmen to make life unbearable for any nation state attempting to be independent. I, we've lived that. I think Argentina, Chile, I mean, now Venezuela, everywhere. If they're trying to live independent, their lives are going to be miserable. Isn't that happening in Iran right now, where they've uh, driven the currency down into worthlessness and the people are suffering? Why? Because Iran wanted to be independent, I would think. All this strife forced such nations to reach out to international institutions for help, which came in the form of military occupation or debt bondage. Only in the arms of the globalist institutions would such nations find any peace. And the quote here, even while they affirm their nationalism, they grope toward those larger groupings in which they alone can hope to find their needs met. Okay, you join the club or you don't get anything. When Prospect spoke on page 60 of what animates such peoples, quote, the modification of the nation state has been confused by the fact that the aspirations of peoples all over the globe are today finding expression in the slogan of nationalism. What animates these peoples is a resolve to emerge rapidly and conclusively from the era of colonialism. They are going somewhere, but it is a real question whether they are going where they think they are. Okay. Patrice Lumumba. And now we'll pick up our author once again here at Redefining God. Why China? Why would the Illuminati, whose home base is in Western Europe, have the Chinese front the public face of their New World Order? Okay, in a previous article, which he's quoting now, he was referring to the occulted powers as the Illuminati. Okay. A clue to their motivations and strategy can be found in the article titled Colonial Elite Rules China for the Illuminati. In it, the author states, let's see. Oh, David Wilcox is the author of this. Anyway, this is the author. The Chinese people would revolt against overt foreign domination, but embrace their place in the New World Order if they believed they were in control. Unquote. The Chinese have suffered greatly at the hands of Western imperialism, as has much of the world. As a result, the Illuminati would have trouble roping many nations into a Western-led New World Order, especially the nationalistic Chinese. Since you can't have a truly global order without the most populous nation on Earth, the Illuminati opted to use their own legacy of destruction to their advantage. One, they set up a China-centered alliance as an opposing force to the Western alliance. Two, they have been driving the world public into the hands of the Chinese alliance. How have they approached this, you ask? They have widely publicized a heinous New World Order planned by the Western powers. And here's a picture from Alex Jones with a picture of New World Order and Annuit Cheptis from the dollar bill, Novus Ordo Seclorum, meaning, of course, the Latin text meaning the new order of things or the new world order. Blueprint of Madmen from InfoWars. So you get the point here that Alex Jones is an agent that is casting shadow on the Western New World Order, and that's his job, while simultaneously publicizing a benign New World Order planned by China and its allies. And here we go to a screen grab from LaRouche PAC. I'm not sure when it is. I'm not sure whether this is before LaRouche PAC split off from the LaRouche org or not, but this is obviously a useful image, because what you see here is Putin and Modi, and I don't know who that is. Is that Kerry Lake? I don't know. This is Xi, and I'm not quite sure who the black gentleman is. And it has the legend, why the United States must join the BRICS, a new international order for mankind. Thus establishing danger from one side and safety from another. They have instigated outrageous and provocative action, both economic and military, by the Western powers. Parentheses, this adds a new insight into the open for all to see Wall Street/City of London criminality and recent Western military boondoggles in Afghanistan, Iraq, Egypt, Libya, and Syria. Close parentheses. They have broadly exposed damaging information about Western nations, especially the U.S. This is the motivation behind WikiLeaks, Snowden, and 1,000 smaller disclosures. And after Snowden outed the NSA's activities to the general public, where did he run to hide? First to China, that is Hong Kong, then to Russia. So what is the psychological message? China and Russia, the BRICS alliance, are where you run for safety from the evil US, its Western allies, and all their horrible behavior. It is really very simple. The Illuminati built a rabbit trap in the BRICS alliance that looks like a nice, safe hole to hide from danger. Now they are beating the bushes with the Western powers to drive the rabbits toward the trap. Clearly, the globalists took into account, quote, the aspirations of peoples all over the globe to emerge rapidly and conclusively from the era of colonialism, unquote, in their planning of the New World Order. It is for this reason that the BRICS alliance was formed and the New World Order was designed in a multipolar fashion. They want the oppressed peoples of the world to join together and see themselves beating the West. And they want them to believe that the Illuminati's multipolar New World Order represents their final victory over oppression and ascension to equality, when it is actually just the beginning of a new phase of subjugation and their fall into equality as global serfs. Do you feel like you might be falling into equality as a global serf? I kind of do. When the Rockefeller plan for the BRICS New World Order with the plan laid out before us, let's take a look at how it was implemented. China, building up the false savior. Major moves toward building the New World Order outlined in Prospect for America began in the late 60s. 1969, the IMF introduces the special drawing right, the planned replacement for the US dollar as the global reserve currency. Okay, that's what our author is suspecting. I can't back it up myself, but let's go ahead. July 1971, former Special Studies Project Director Henry Kissinger held secret meetings in China to lay the groundwork for their introduction onto the global stage. Okay, this is evidence that I find very compelling, okay? It's Henry Kissinger, the author of the Special Studies project, the director of the project. And of course, he coming from Harvard and forget his teacher's name, but just all of this stuff is all tied to the empire, and I would call it the Anglo-American Empire. City of London, Wall Street. Okay, so here's Henry Kissinger, and he goes to China to lay the groundwork for their introduction onto the global stage. Here he is with Chinese Premier Chu Enlai. During the visit, August 1971, President Nixon takes America off the gold standard. Yep. George Shultz involved in that, of course. This was the first major explosion in the dollar's demolition as the global reserve currency, parentheses, to make way for its replacement by the globalists' SDR sometime around 2018, close parentheses. So this man's idea was that they were going to replace the dollar by 2018 with some currency based on the special drawing rights. Well, that didn't happen, but it doesn't mean it can't. February 1972, Nixon visits and opens China. Here he is with Chairman Mao, the devil, the Satan himself of the 1950s Cold War. And here's the President of the United States, shaking his hand, smiling. Now, here you go. Here's some more pretty hard evidence, right? June 1973, David Rockefeller Sr. visits China to start working out implementation details for what is to come. Here he is meeting with Premier Chu Enlai. So what was set in motion by these events? By 1978, Deng Xiaoping took over and, quote, developed socialism with Chinese characteristics and Chinese economic reform, also known as the, quote, socialist market economy, unquote, and opened China to the global market. Okay? Remember when China's currency was worthless and you couldn't get any anyway because it was just this really deep divide between China and the Western world? And now here we go, allowing their currency to rise to a point right now where I think it's extremely valuable currency. And who did that? Well, we did it. An interesting view on the hidden dynamics behind this development is offered in the above-linked Colonial Elites Rule China for the Illuminati article. Okay, that's linked above. And here's some quotes from it. Wang Hao, a historian at the China Institute of International Studies, has recorded that Mao's deputy Chu Enlai met David Rockefeller in June 1973. When meeting David Rockefeller, Chu said to him that it was necessary to find appropriate methods conducive to the development of the trade between two sides under different political systems. The corporate communist merger, began when Deng Xiaoping came to power in the late 1970s and introduced his market reforms with the slogan, quote, to get rich is glorious, unquote. Well, that's some socialism for you, isn't it? I say that's some kind of socialism, isn't it? Everybody get rich. However, after 30 years of Maoism, his regime was hopelessly ill-equipped to run a market economy. They turned to the wealthiest Chinese tycoons in Hong Kong for guidance. Oh, they didn't know how to run an economy, so they turned to the tycoons. I guess the tycoons know something about it. Wow. The most powerful Hong Kong tycoon is Li Ka-shing, the richest Asian in the world and an Illuminati insider, unquote. And a reference to Fritz Springmeier's write-up on the Illuminati Li family. You can check that later if you like. This helped put in place a Chinese elite that, quote, is a merger between the communist leadership, Hong Kong tycoons, and the criminal triads. All three factions derive their power from Illuminati collaboration, unquote. Needless to say, globalist coordination with China, and here's a picture of Henry Kissinger with President Xi, and their BRICS partner, Russia, and there we have President Putin and his good buddy, Henry Kissinger, has continued unabated to this day. In closing, I'd simply say that any global solution offered to us in the coming years is, in fact, a globalist solution. If you do not get together with your neighbors to start exercising self-sufficiency and control over your life, you will fall into globalist dependency and control by default. And if you do not get together with those in your local community to devise a currency of your own or other method of trade and barter, you will end up using bankster currency by default. Power that is not taken into your own hands is left to the predators who grasp for it. All right. And it says update number 1, update 2014. So this article is obviously before 2014. It's another reason that I'm very impressed with it. And I wish he had written some more. There is one more good article on that website about the Rockefellers and the NWO. So if you want, go over to redefininggod.com and check out the material there. Wow, 64 comments. Very interesting. So there's the Totos. So this is my question is, given the evidence that we've just heard, isn't it likely and more likely than not that the opening of China was in fact the beginning of the creation of an alternate economy that would not be based on the US dollar and that would be created by sharing American wealth in underdeveloped places like China, and particularly China, in order to bring about such an equality of circumstance between your average American and your average Chinese person that the economies could be interchangeable and could all be ruled by the same rules. And this is where I think the phrase the rules-based order comes in, is that the empire, the occulted powers, if you will, have had a plan for a long time to create a one world government. And the idea that somehow, after the Soviet Union broke up, that Putin was able to create a fully sovereign Russia, or that China is not answerable at some high point to financial institutions that have allowed all of this growth, and that we in America have not been completely psychologically bamboozled and driven into opposing camps that are ultimately aimed, as Professor Zhang says, at creating a new American Civil War to destroy everything and provide ourselves as the remnants to be picked up and rebuilt like a phoenix from the ashes by the real New World Order. That's what concerns me. And I think the only thing I can ask is that the American people start looking into this. Read this article, pass this video around, talk about it. And the idea that we can't be sovereign anymore, that it's just too old, too late. That's what they were trying to say in 1955. I don't accept it. I think we can be sovereign. I think we can be a successful country, and I think that the Western Hemisphere can be a base for a peaceful hemisphere. And I do applaud President Trump's efforts to withdraw from the rest of the world in order to get back to making America great again and making it productive. But we're going to have to get our industry back together, and the ability for us to do that is limited by our financing and the attacks on the dollar. Of course, I saw that they're doing another, what was it, $53 billion of quantitative easing right now. Follow the silver market if you want to see where the economists are getting worried, as because the silver is getting more expensive than the models predicted, and it could be something that causes the banks some severe problems. Although it doesn't look like it from the stock market, does it? All right. Well, I enjoyed reading that, and I'm looking forward to reading your comments after I close out the show. Thanks, everyone, for making those comments, and I read them all every time. And so I will see you guys tomorrow with our great friend. No, not you, Toto. We'll be here tomorrow with Henry Kissinger of the LaRouche Organization. See you then. Calm down, Coco.